known for her publications on California historical archaeology, most notably Spanish and Mexican period sites and Chinese immigrant communities. But some of her early work was in Lebanon, excavating Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Roman sites. In 1974, she came to California after fleeing the war in Lebanon. Then she completed her PhD on the California missions at UC Santa Barbara, and with historian Judith Marvin, established the cultural resources firm Foothill Resources. Julia has served as president of both the Society for Historical Archaeology and the Society for California Archaeology. She was the first historical archaeologist appointed to the State Historical Resources Commission, where she served as chairperson. In 2009, she completed the award-winning Getty book, The California Missions, History, Art, and Preservation, co-authored with Edna Kimbrough of Santa Cruz. Welcome, Julia. Thank you so much for coming to speak for us tonight.
Thank you for asking me. I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, friends. Hi, everybody. I can't see all their names, but my call out to Charlene, as I said earlier. So I'm going to get right into this. I'm wearing my keffiyeh. This is the standard headdress for the field. So in honor of this. But let's get right into the talk. Now, I know you all know your geography, but maps are really handy. So here the area is pointing to Jordan, and it's at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba. Just a bit north of there is Petra. And if we were in a room, I would say, has anybody here been to Petra? So often people have. It's quite a destination. But I also wanted to say why in the world your Spanish colonial archaeologist is in the Middle East. And so I began my career, this is a very short thing, but in Lebanon. And I have grandparents, great-grandparents buried in Lebanon, born there, worked as missionaries in the universities. And so I began my career from 72 to 74 on the Phoenician side of Sarepta. I had a fresh little MA from University of Denver and spent 2 years there, wherein I was as a refugee from the wars that began in that year, came to California. And there I recalculated and turned into a Spanish mission archaeologist. But I developed very dear friends in those years in Lebanon, and several of them went on to have their careers stay in the Middle East, particularly Patricia Bikai, who was the head of ACOR, and Leila Badr, who was the director of the American University of Beirut Museum for 50 years, and Martha Jakowski, who ended up teaching at Brown University and doing excavations all over. And this little cohort of buddies became my busman's holiday. And if you aren't familiar with that term, it's what a busman does when he takes a vacation. He takes a bus trip. So on my vacations, I would have my dear friends put me on as a crew chief on one of their crews, and I worked on a National Register program through the U.S. Information Agency, a Bronze Age tell in Syria, the Nabatian Banquet Hall in 2005. In 2008, back to Petra to excavate a mosque, and then a Phoenician temple in Tyre, Lebanon in 2012. And these let me have wonderful adventures and hang out with my friends and use my terrible Arabic, which worked okay with the crews. And I knew something of the artifacts. So this is one of my adventures I'm telling you about in 2005 in Petra. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Petra. We'll go through that briefly. It's the flashier site than Beda. But Petra's on the Rift Valley, and the Rift Valley goes from the Dead Sea all the way through to Olduvai Gorge in Africa. This is the same geologic rift that makes for this great chasm in the landscape. this is the rift as it goes through the Petra area. And it's the nomads began to enter this area about 580 BC. The Nabataeans came in, and Wadi is a spring, and Wadi Musa is Moses's spring. And this is the biblical place where Moses put his staff into the ground and the water sprang forth. And so Wadi Musa is the town right near Petra. The Nabataeans became great traders. This was the spice route from the east, going through Arabia and Syria to the Levant. And by 100 BCE, they say before Christian era, not just before Christ, BCE, they developed this very distinctive architecture. They were very wealthy. They were rich from all the trade. They were oriented toward Hellenistic ideas, like contemporary Alexandria. But in 64 BC, they came under Roman rule. The Roman Empire reached out and grabbed this part of the world. They only taxed them how they didn't defeat them. But Petra also has a Roman amphitheater, which the Romans built everywhere they went. Then in about 106, I have to look at my notes because I can't remember all these dates. Anyway, it flourished all the way up through the Roman era. And the most famous aspect of Petra is probably the Seek, which is this cleft that the wadi ran down. And it was still paved with Roman stones. And there's little aqueducts running along the side of it that you can see. Wonder if my pointer works. Oh, yes, it does. Good. There's the aqueducts going down the side. And then the classic view at the end of the Seek is at the temple, it's called the Treasury Building, the Khazna El Faroun, and that's the treasury of the pharaohs. And this is where, the Raiders of the Lost Ark came in and thrilled their audiences. And it is magnificent. You can see the scale of the people and the little donkeys in front there. It's very Hellenistic, but distinctly Nabataean. Carved facades, the natural red rock was carved and made these magnificent facades, but the columns, the Hellenistic look of it came from all of these trading influences that they had. It was rediscovered, of course, the Bedouin never lost it, but in 1812, the Swiss explorer John Burckhardt came and rediscovered it, popularized it. And this sketch is by a man named David Roberts from 1839. And Roberts' prints and Roberts' sketches of the Middle East are quite famous. He documented things that are no longer around. But while the Khazna is the most famous building, this huge valley opens up. It's about 4 square kilometers, about 1.5 square miles. And the cliffs around are all carved with these fabulous edifices. It's very hard to photograph because you have this huge amphitheater of a place with all these carvings around the side. And the center of it was filled with roads and shops and houses and all kinds. It was a big city. Of course, that is now long gone. And these carvings remain, but you have to picture it as a huge metropolis, a very successful metropolis. This is the largest standing building in Petra that still exists, right down by the bottom. And again, just to give you a scale of what this city must have been. There is terrible erosion going on, and most of this, the erosion at the bottom, is from sand, wind-blown sand. And so that is what, there's enough rain to cause a lot of problems, but the howling sand is just wearing away the edifices. Here's a whole complex that you can barely see there, the architecture still. This is the Great Temple that was excavated by Martha Jakowski, one of my Lebanon buddies, and over decades through Brown University. And they have, this is in the middle of the valley, and they have these great little elephants that are on tusks that are on the edge of the cornices that have become quite famous. Cute. Christianity came to the valley about 313 AD, and because the Eastern Roman Empire was there. This is Constantine, of course, made the capital at Constantinople about 337, and they built beautiful churches all over the Roman world. This one was excavated by Patricia Bukai, my other Lebanon buddy, and beautiful mosaics, great basilica. And they found a trove of burned papyrus, and anything written from this time period, of course, is precious. And when the discovery was made, I arrived for a different reason just after that, but they were panicky on how to transport these burnt papyrus fragments out, and they got hundreds of pizza boxes from the local pizza place and could lay them all in the boxes flat and secure in those nice little sturdy cardboard boxes and transport them all to the archive in Amman for stabilization. So we're going to talk about Beda. So down here, I've underlined Petra. So that's where that side is. Wadi Musa is the village. And Beda is this area to the north where it was the agricultural area. So this is the outskirts of Petra, and different universities are, of course, scouring around Petra, because a metropolis like that takes a big community and geography to support it. The picture on the left is one of them. There's a very famous Neolithic village. Let me see if I can get my pointer out here. Where did it go? There it is. And that was excavated by Diane Kirkbride, 1958 to 1983. And it was the first time they saw in the Neolithic period that round domiciles, residences, became square. So this is the first square built Neolithic village, very famous and very badly preserved, however. So in surveying this area, Patricia Bukai had spent 4 years, and they found extensive water systems, channels, cisterns, wine presses, fermenting. It's the agricultural support area for Petra. Orchard walls, fields, tombs, 2 mosques, and a Byzantine church. I went back later and excavated one of the mosques, but that's a different story. The caravans, of course, stayed here and not in the city. So those great trading caravans that would come through would hang out in the outskirts and not go downtown. So by 2005, in the spring season, they had pretty much documented all of it. And this high place, about 550 feet high, this great rock outcropping, they'd kind of worked around and avoided it. And, you know, it's just a rocky high place. So they'd left it to the end and didn't pay much attention. And when I flew in, they'd only been up there a couple of days. And in this cleft, they came up with a carved Roman head of a god. And so my plane landed after 32 hours of, you know, horrible flights through Frankfurt and driving down from Amman, you know, with a driver in a car, and arriving completely brain dead. And when I walked in and they're finishing breakfast and getting ready to go out on the dig and told me what they'd found, I just grabbed my pack and went with them and never had any jet lag. All it takes is a little excitement to, you know, get you up for your field work. So this carved had rearranged, of course, all their plants. So we have our crews, the local Nabatians are the diggers on the site. And there's 4 archaeologists from Jordan, Greece, Canada, me, 2 Jordanian interns, 34 local workers, and volunteers from Amman. Once we started finding these heads, they have an archaeology group too, of course, in Jordan. And people would come down to volunteer to help to get their hands on this exciting dig. That's a shot of my worker Hakeem when he came up with, you know, yalla, alhamdulillah, I've got a head. A lot of competition between the digging crews. And these carved heads appeared almost every day. It was just like a gold rush. I mean, it was so exciting. I know we're all scientific and we're there for the information, but there's nothing like treasures to, you know, get your blood going. So there was tons of publicity, you know, in the Arab papers and English papers, and security became a big problem. So we had to transport these things down to there weren't any facilities, but the office of our engineer, Tahani, a local Jordanian, she turned her office into the repository for the artifacts, and we had to have a guard on them all the time and a guard on the site because, of course, the idea of these being lucrative, did not miss from the local Bedouin. Prince Riyadh and his wife came down to visit them. This is Patricia, my friend who's the director of the dig. And this is our first couple of weeks tally. So what were they for? Well, finally, 4 of them came up and they're attached to column capitals. So this is the top of those big columns, the capitals. And later 7 other heads were pieced together with other fragments of capitals. So they were what they call bosses. These are on the center of the 4 sides of the column. And the fashion of using bosses, using heads, came from Egypt, likely from the Middle Kingdom, because the Greek didn't use heads. And the great motif below was the symbolism of all the wine in the wine country that we're in. Here's back on the left, this is the Kazna, the big famous temple in Petra. And there I have little arrows pointing to the bosses, so you can see how they appear. And of course, there's all kinds of small fragments of architectural elements that come up. And one of them had this opium poppy design. We were clearly in a Bacchanalian place. This was a place of drinking and fun and leisure. And we all speculated about the hedonistic practices that went on here. Of course, we had a lot of high-tech solutions to how to get these things down the hill. On the left, there are old carpet fragments, which we gleaned from town, and you'd wrap around them. And then this little wheelbarrow has an iron wheel and no rubber, and it takes all these men to get it down the hill. You can kind of see the gouge in the ground next to it as they try to transport it down to the trucks. There were some capitals. You can see the columns were made, these called drums, column drums over here. And so there were some column drums. We have a little makeshift plank to ease them up there and then get them down. You can see the road down below. This is a very awkward place to bring things down from. At this point, we were noticing that although there were fragments of decorative architecture, there were very few architectural pieces. There weren't any big construction stones. We kind of just had the frosting. You know, we had the little elements that were left over from this building. And you'll want to know what area I was in charge of. I had this very prestigious little entryway to the lower areas where the donkeys came in. So there's a little doorway here. This is my excavation area. There's a doorway here, and then the donkeys come down here, and here's a little watering area and a little place for some little temple offerings, and another room here. But you know, these little pieces, everybody had their area, you know, and you have to put it all together at the end like a big puzzle. By the end of the season, poor engineer Tahani's office was crammed. She couldn't get in there. It was full of these pieces. They were transported back to Amman, and we had a fabulous, talented local workman spend all winter piecing together all these fragments to try to make as many capitals and as much sense out of all these pieces that we had. So finally, we get a plan. Of course, on the team, we have, you know, engineers and mappers and all kinds of things. So this is our plan from the season. Cryptoporticus, you learn all kinds of new words working in these Middle Eastern sites. And the Cryptoporticus is a semi-subterranean passageway that is underneath a larger structure. So it's like a crypt-like porticus entryway. So it's a way to go through that's semi-subterranean. So we had that. That's the big cleft where we found most of the heads. But then outside of it, there's a big courtyard. There's baths here. There's a cistern. This is the major gateway. There's cooking areas. So this is a dining complex and bathing. And again, all of our hedonistic images are coming to life with our discoveries. So now the key member, the miracle worker, in my opinion, on the team was Chrysanthos Kanopoulos. And he is Greek and he's an architect. He specializes in Greek, but he could take the fragments that we found and reconstruct what the building must have looked like over it. So down below, this is the cryptoporticus where we're digging. Here's my little dig area over here. But there were springers along the side here, which the vaults would have gone over, and he reconstructed the vaults. And then with the columns and the type of structure that would have been appropriate for that time period with all of those international influences, he came up with his design of what this place would have looked like from nothing, from nothing I could have figured out. So this is the great dining hall. Here's all of the column heads with all the little bosses, our little head bosses around them. And then there was above them, let me get my terms right here. They call it a atrium. Thank you. This atrium above it would have been a gallery where you could have looked down on the dining hall again. So these, Patricia, of course, pulled all the clues together. She's the overall director. And over the season, she looked at the ceramics and the history and the documents that we knew, the fragmentary documents we had on the Nabatians, and concluded in the date range that this was built by the Nabataean ruler of Petra at the time, Milikos, M-A-L-I-C-H-O-S, Milikos the First. He ruled from 59 to 30 BCE, and his reign marks the beginning of the Roman influence on the Nabataeans. The artifacts all document the cooking and food service and baths, and all of these designs from the grapes and all of the heads of the Roman gods are Bacchylian gods. They're all, there's kind of a bunch of deities that are standard for, drinking and having a good time. And these heads represented just about all of them. It's located, of course, in the wine production area, which we looked at in the Beta area, and it's accompanied by other fragments of elephants and horned lions and a goat and a boar and the grapes, vines, and poppies, and all of these little symbols tend to it's a banquet hall. So when the king wanted to get out of town to go to his country house, about 5 kilometers north of Petra, he would go out to this great hall. Patricia, of course, published in 2015. And so this is 2 plates out of the publication in the American Journal of Archaeology, the Archaeological Institute of America. That's their major publication. Patricia and Chrysanthos and Sherry Sanders authored that publication. I had field notes to contribute, but I'm not an author on these. So eventually, the heads, I should go back. Let me go back one. Many of them were identified. We have Medusa, Dionysus, Isis, Pan, Bacchus, satyrs, Bacchantes, and as they say, all the usual suspects from Dionysian staging. There were 12 male, 16 female, and 3 of them were unidentifiable. The artistic style and the techniques tied to other fragments they'd found in Petra. These are local craftsmen. They'd done other work around Petra, and they could identify their hand on the statuary. So why was it abandoned? What was going on? So it's uncertain, but it was not occupied for a very long period of time. Certainly within King Malicos's reign. He died about 30-31 BCE. So it may have been his death that brought about the abandonment. There was also a major earthquake about that same time, and that may have destabilized the structure, and it had to be abandoned. But it was not occupied long, empty for about a century, and evidently the doors were blocked. So it remained intact, but silt filtered in. You could tell from the stratigraphy that it was intact but abandoned. And then after about 100 years, it was systematically dismantled. And all of the building stone was taken and gone off to build other buildings in Petra, which was still a thriving city. But all of the Baccalian, all of the godheads and the poppy and the grape things were all not taken and were thrown into the cryptoporticus. So they kind of severed off all of the fun parts of this hall and threw them away and took the building blocks into town and left them for us to find. So empty for, let's see. So this is then the dig shots. So I'm going to leave lots of room for questions since you may have them. But the rubbish that we found there salvaged this new story of life in Petra. And the beautiful sculpted heads went on to many museum displays. There were many publications out of this. It gave a new look on the social life, the fun life of the kings of Petra. For me, working on this site with the descendants of the Nabatians who are still living there and who are still working and often have worked on archaeology sites in Petra through generations. Jobs are passed down from father to son. And it's, a pleasure working for this man. I have my keffiyeh on today. You can see that's the standard dig garb for all of this. But also, of course, there's a thrill of discovery. So we all like science, but the opportunity and the luck of just being on this dig was just extraordinary for me. And when you giving this presentation to you, being asked to do it, I've been able to relive it a bit. So I thank you all for inviting me here and for going on this little memory trip with me. So I will stop there and see if there's questions and see if anyone's been to Petra. Has anyone in your group been there and wants to make a comment?
Not yet, but I want to go with you.
Okay.
Well done, Julia. Thank you.
Yeah.
It must have been such a thrill to find all those things, all those amazing heads and architectural features. What an amazing adventure.
Yes, so many digs we're all on, we're sifting for little pieces of things and little artifacts, and we know it's going to be important and things will be found out, but we don't get that just kind of rush of having extraordinary, really immediately visible, cool things, coming up. And everybody's thrilled. The workmen were thrilled. We were thrilled. It was a great dig.
Yeah, much different from the handful of debitage we get so often here.
I know.
I mean, nothing wrong with that, but
I dig a lot in California. Another
expression,
Yes.
Okay, does anyone in the group have any other questions for Julia about her amazing adventures?
And has anyone been there? Has anyone traveled to that part? I guess not.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself if you have.
Yeah.
Can you see these other areas that you were working in the valley and all that, or do you just get to go to Petra itself when you go there?
No, there's roads. I mean, in this picture, you can see a paved road behind there, and you would just, if you get to Petra, you could take a taxi, hire a driver, have them drive you around. Or if you're in Amman, you get a driver for a couple of days and go visit Wadi Rum, where Lawrence of Arabia hid out, and World War I. And, there's lots of wonderful things to see, lots of castles, lots of caravanseries, castles in the desert, and Roman sites. There's Roman sites everywhere. And ancient sites, Neolithic sites. Yeah.
Guided tours now after all these years?
Are there guided tours? Oh, certainly. Yeah. Jordan's very peaceful. And also because there's so much turmoil in the Middle East in most of the countries. I'm glad I did my dig in Syria many years ago because nobody's going back there. But all these archaeologists who want to study Middle Eastern archaeology, Jordan's pretty much the only place they can get in. Lebanon's fraught with problems and Syria's out of bounds. And yeah, you can also visit Egypt though. I recommend that. That's peaceful and safe. But Jordan's a wonderful place to visit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bucket list.
Mhm.
Actually, I have a question. When you mentioned that this King Malicos, that they believe he died sometime around 3130 BCE.
Mhm.
Not too familiar with the history of Petra, but I know that is a period, basically the date area of 3031 was the Battle of Actium, where Anthony was defeated by Octavian and Agrippa, and that was basically the fall of Antony and Cleopatra. And I know that many of Cleopatra, their allies, were in the area, possibly Petra. I was wondering if any experts thought that might have played a role in what happened, at least not
Actually,
the building itself, but to maybe Malicos.
right. No, that's an excellent observation. And I'd even made a note, good for you, because that, what was it? The Battle of Actium, Caesar Augustus had the big
Yeah.
victory there at Actium. And that was the same year. And that is also another factor that they say may have, because the coincidence of all those years coming about the time this was abandoned and with Malicos's death, any or all of those events may have caused the abandonment of this. And so the new king who came after him simply may not have wanted to support this summer palace of pleasure that Malicos had built out of town.
Yeah.
But yes, that's a very excellent observation.
May have been some bad memories of, they wanted to show a complete rupture in joining Rome too, because I know
Yes.
it's a neighbor, Herod, who was an ally of Anthony, somehow he managed to pivot, but it was a little bit difficult. But, yeah.
Right. Well, the Romans were also, they were kind of careful of Petra. As I say, it was enveloped within the Roman Empire, but they didn't disrupt the local politics and bureaucracy. They taxed them so they could get some money out of them, but they wanted the trade to continue. And so they kind of left the city with a bit of autonomy until about 63 AD. And then they put the screws down a little bit, but the Nabataeans kept making money for quite a while.
They sort of probably understood the importance of leaving things be as far as caravan routes and all that. So.
You have a question, Pat?
I do. I was wondering if they have any theories about why they would have built this banquet hall in such an inaccessible location.
Well, it seems remote now, but it was the middle of their grape growing region. So it's kind of like going to Napa Valley out of San Francisco or going up to the Shenandoah Valley. It would be the country house. So it would be out of the downtown area, and you're surrounded by grape fields and cisterns and lush agricultural areas. So I think of it, now it's all kind of desert and out of town, but I would think more of it as a escape, a country escape.
Even
From
up
the city.
way up high on top of that rock outcrop.
It probably gave them I'm just thinking off the cuff, but practically speaking, it wouldn't take up any agricultural land. So you don't
Okay.
want to, build in the middle of your fields, and there would be breezes and a view, and there's that sense of superiority in being on this naturally
Right.
high rocky place. So it may just have appealed to their sense of drama,
Up
to be-
above the commoners.
Yes,
But it
yes.
would be expensive to transport all the building materials up there. It would take a lot of labor.
Indeed, this was not an inexpensive operation. This was a major thing. I could go back to that picture, but it was a enormously, I don't know, opulent. It's just the word that keeps coming to mind. Yeah.
Hmm.
And invitations may have been quite special, to be able to go to them.
Oh, indeed.
We have a question from Jay. It says, why did you dig there?
I dug there because I was invited, because my first friend, Patricia Bakai, was doing that large survey of the whole area. And she said, why don't you join us this season? It's the last one we're going to be there. And I had joined her on other projects, and, you just get a crew and do what you're told and keep your notebook. And, so I just got lucky. So she dug there because she was surveying the whole region. And this was the last little promontory that they hadn't mapped and investigated and identified, thinking that it would not be important. They found many other wonderful things and complexes of aqueducts and cisterns and wine presses and 2 mosques and a church, and right next to the Neolithic village that was so famous. So this was kind of leftover, a surprise for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they discarded all the decorative elements and just took, I wonder if that stylistically they were just had gotten over that style, or if they wanted to reject the whole hedonistic feel and just needed the bones, as it were, of the architecture.
Right. And it's of course a long tradition to reuse abandoned buildings for new construction. And that happens all over the ancient world. And there's a lot of good building material out there, but they clearly did not take any of those Baccalian elements. The capitals were just all bespoke wine and opium and, drinking and gods that had fun, and they wanted none of it. None of that came back to the city.
Lucky for you guys.
It is interesting. Lucky for us. I know that was a good for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Julia?
I mean, it's not really a question. It's probably more of a comment of, I don't know, when I think of leaders building in inhospitable places, actually Masada just comes to mind, like kind of on the other side of the Dead Sea, or on the other side of the Jordan River. Just Mesa that a palace was built on. So that just kind of reminds me of that, what Herod the Great did, kind of similar to like just building up on this outcrop.
Right. And often those high place constructions were defensive.
Yeah.
And there's lots of Roman forts and Crusader forts, and they're all on high places that are defensible. But this didn't have, walls or turrets or moats or anything. It was in a peaceful ag land that they controlled. And so it just seems to be purely pleasure.
Yeah.
But yes, there's many other, most castle sites are on some kind of defensible promontory. No, it's a good observation. Yeah. Not as tragic as Masada.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Any other questions here? All right. Well, I'm gonna
Okay.
stop recording here.